You've landed on The Substance. I'm your host, Philip Marinello, and we're very happy to have you with us here today. Whether it's your first time or your 187th time here with us, we're glad you decided to join us today, and I think we've got a great show for you. Here at The Substance, we are looking to have conversations that help us all better appreciate goodness, truth, and beauty. Previous guests include folks like Film Spotting's Josh Larson, Mike White of the Projection Booth podcast, New York Times film critic Alyssa Wilkinson, Joe Lynch, and our friends over at Letterboxd, Slim and Mitchell. This week, very happy to ring in spooky season here at The Substance with Clark Collis and his new book, Screaming and Conjuring. It's a book that is about the horror movies that are like a half generation before what we have today, from, as the title would suggest, from Scream to The Conjuring, kind of themes, patterns. It's a really cool, really fun book that's also just a really beautiful book to have on your shelf or on your table. So check out the book at any local retailers, and if your local retailer doesn't have it, tell them to order it. Now, before we get to the conversation here, we'd like to invite everybody to hit that 5-star button or follow or subscribe to the podcast. You can do that for free. Do that, and it helps everybody find the show. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Clark Collis on his new book, Screaming and Conjuring. Clark, it's good to finally sit down with you, man. Welcome to The Substance here.
Thank you so much for having me on.
I was telling you before we recorded, it was funny because I was aware of you. I've been aware of you for a while, and I'm sure going through your work that over the years I've read you, and it's just maybe not stuck out because of your two books that are out are just really lovely packages. But was going back through the emails to send you the recording info, and then I saw we'd actually corresponded with your previous book on Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not sure any of our movies, I'm sorry, any of our memories have been improved over the
Good
past
night.
10 years, one way and another. What's interesting, and I used to find that, so I used to work, I spent 18 years working at Entertainment Weekly, and that period sort of covered the period, I mean, at the start of, in like 2005, when I started working there, we had sort of limited output on the internet, and that output was like handled by a dedicated kind of web team,
Sure.
which was not a large web team. And it was still, as a writer, like that was a whole sort of other world, and you would write things for the magazine, and then they would appear online. But over the course of the 18 years, obviously, all of us, including myself, began to write more and more for the internet, and really, cranking out a lot of copy, and some of it, just announcements about this and that, and sometimes more, detailed and thought out pieces. That's just the way it goes. But the number of times, either while working at Entertainment Weekly or writing my first book about Shaun of the Dead, or my particularly writing this new uh, book, Screaming and Conjuring, I would be thinking, well, who's written about this subject? And then I would see what seemed to me to be an unfamiliar headline from Entertainment Weekly, and I would think, oh, I wonder which of us wrote that. And then I would look, and it would be me, inevitably. And I would just have and I would sometimes I would then think, oh yes, I did write that. And other times I would think, I have no memory of writing that at all. I mean, what you got to remember is that some days we would write 8 or 10 articles a day, and other people would write much more than that. But as I said, some of it hopefully well thought out writing, but then other times it would just be, sort of
Got to make that deadline.
yeah, absolutely, and get this piece of news out.
Well, I do remember there was a period of time in there, not the entire time, but definitely before the internet was ubiquitous. That was as a long, essentially a lifelong movie lover. I had a print subscription for quite a while to Entertainment Weekly, so I'm sure I read yours. And I also feel like I don't have any specific ones. My brain's not that broken yet, but I feel like I remember your name just on pull quotes for
Sure.
various movies over the decades, whether it's on the back of a DVD box or a poster. Like your name is a movie. Your name is a name rather that I associate with the movies.
Well, possibly. I covered lots of things for Entertainment Weekly, from Marvel movies to The Crown. I was the correspondent for The Crown because, being British, I at least knew who the royal who all the members of the royal family were, which did make things a little bit easier. But I definitely reviewed a lot of horror films. One of my favorite things to do would be to see a new horror film on a Friday morning, because a lot of horror films, they do not screen for press, like for press reviews. Uh, so if you were going to see like an Underworld movie, for example, or a Resident Evil movie, they probably wouldn't screen those films for critics. And so I would, but we would still publish reviews. So what that meant, and this was before, I think nowadays you could just go and see it on Thursday evening, and those count as, a film will quote unquote open on Friday, but actually you can go and see it on Thursday. I'm sure everyone has had this experience. But those were back in the days when they didn't tend to do that many Thursday evening screenings. That's my recollection. And so I would, instead of getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning to be at work for 10, I would leisurely get up at 10 in all likelihood, and then stroll. This is when I was living in New York. Stroll down to the cinema at Union Square for like an 11 o'clock screening, watch a horror movie, and then come back and or go to the office and write it up. And that would kind of be my day's work, again, quote unquote.
The
And I'm
dream.
sure, yes, I'm sure I was at times perhaps slightly more generous towards some horror movies, just because I was like, I can't believe I'm getting paid to, get up and go to see a horror movie on a Friday morning and then write, 200 words about it. I mean, those are the days that having a job at Entertainment Weekly definitely seemed like a great gig.
No, that yeah, I it's a shame that that sort of thing doesn't exist more, not just for the cush jobs, but like it really provided something special to have a handful of unique, specific voices that were there regularly that fans and the general public could check in with regularly. It is also very cool, and there's also a lot of opportunities for a variety of folks to find their little niches, but there's now like a million niches versus like I could name you several critics right now, but I don't know, some mom or dad off the street, hey, like name a movie critic. It's a lot different now than it was 20 or 30 years ago. As far as influencing the general public's opinion, now it's hyper specific algorithms where some people might not even realize movies are out.
No, absolutely. And it was, I mean, Entertainment Weekly, it's still, ongoing as a vibrant and really good website. But obviously, it used to be a print magazine. And even though it was weekly, there was a lot of competition to get um, things you were interested in the magazine. I mean, let me rephrase that. Entertainment Weekly was very much a uh, broad interest culture magazine, and so we would cover at length, the big movies, your Marvels, or if Julia Roberts was in a movie, so on and so forth. Big hit TV shows like Lost. Um, but as someone who sort of likes the horror movies and the more cultier side of things, uh, you were really fighting for space to get that in there, and so and so it would always be, it would just be make me so happy if they would give me, 5 pages to cover The Room, which isn't a horror movie, but is, that movie from Tommy Wiseau, which no one had really heard of,
Sure,
and
yeah.
then by a string of peculiar coincidences, I found myself going tubing in LA with Tim and Eric, the comedians, and Eric Wareheim
I
was
love
a
Tim and Eric.
they're fantastic. Well, they happen to be friends of mine, and I was staying with my friends in LA, and they were like, "Oh, we're going to go tubing with Tim and Eric this afternoon," and I was like, "Okay." And the first time, and I was a big fan of Tim and Eric's too. And the first time I saw Tim and Eric, they were blowing up huge rubber tires at a gas station. They were sitting on these rubber tires, blowing them up, which seemed like such a Tim and Eric kind of vision in a strange way. And
Very
then,
much so.
both of them turned out to be in real life both very nice and reasonably normal human beings. And so we had a delightful day tubing down a river. And then Eric said, "Oh, I'm going to go and see The Room," and I'd never heard of this at all. uh, and then we went to the Sunset Five, and this was like at midnight. It was screening at midnight, and Tommy Wiseau was there, and people were throwing spoons at the screen, and it was
Oh
absolutely
yeah.
packed. And I remember racing back to Entertainment Weekly and say we've got to do like a big piece on The Room, and that's when you're met with absolute blank faces, of course, quite reasonably. And I
You're
had
like,
to, I
and
think
this is why, because we gotta spread the word.
Yes. Well, yes, and it was also that it had by that point become something that well-known comedians like Paul Rudd or director Edgar Wright had all gone to see. Um, and so I was told that I could write it as they were usually okay with running more peculiar stuff if you could kind of inject famous people into it, basically.
Totally.
And
No,
so
that was
then I
the
had
nature
to.
of it.
Yes, and so then I had to set about almost like a lawyer, sort of marshaling my case for the prosecution as to why we should run this article.
Well, I love that, just the vision of you with Tim and Eric blowing up tubes on the side of the road, getting to go in it. That's primo. I have not heard that story before in any of your other podcasts, so I
Sure.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah. They
just
were
saw, I think
great,
the other day, the
great
new
people.
season of On Cinema just fired back up again. So excited to have that back in our lives here with the few months of Oscar lead up here.
Yes. Yeah. 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 There's lots of Tim and Eric. There is not really a shortage. I don't, and nor should there be. There is really a shortage of Tim and Eric content one way and another.
Well, I usually like to have something kind of fun for the intro. With this conversation, particularly with the book, I've got like several, and I want to try to run through them quickly. The first one I will say is 1984 publishing. We get a lot of, and I'm sure not as many as some of the larger platforms that you speak with, but very regularly we get people soliciting us and soliciting me. Hey, cover our book, cover our author, cover our speaker who's traveling, this and that. The little, when we got the book, the letter and the package from 1984, and I'll give a particular Matthew. I'm not going to try to butcher that last name, but just a lovely little package he sent over, just saying, hey, like if you consider. I was like, I'm already sold on covering this, but he sent me a lovely little personalized letter that he signed in a nice little package. So props to 1984 for doing a wonderful job on that department.
Matthew is absolutely great. He's my publisher. He's just I mean, he's a lovely human being, and also so determined to, that the books that he publish, uh, be like art books. I mean, some of them are art books, some of them are photo books, and
Oh, totally.
he has a background as a designer and someone who's interested in design. No, he's always pressing for the books themselves to be real works of art. And I wouldn't say that. I mean, I wouldn't say I disagree, but I'm because I'm an egomaniacal writer, so I think you should be able to just print up, you know, my Word document in A4, staple it together, and send it out, and people will be so wowed by my prose that you don't need all the bells and whistles. I'm not denigrating the design of the book by calling it by bells and whistles. No, but Matthew's always the one saying, "Oh, we need to go to this printer to get the to be honest with you, I don't know what he's talking about half the time, but I'm just always like, sure, yes, yes, yes. And then the cover of Screaming and Conjuring has a fabulous illustration by
Mm.
Gary Pullen, aka Ghoulish Gary Pullen, who is one of the sort of foremost horror artists, I guess you could say. I mean, I'm sure he does other things as well, but he's done, an array of posters. He's just done the covers for a lot of Stephen King paperback reissues. And I can very well remember a year or so ago having a meeting with Gary. It was Matthew and Gary and myself on Zoom. And I think like my brief to Gary was, horror but cool, and which is an incredibly vague and uninstructive brief. And I was very glad that he came back with this spectacular illustration. We were very fortunate to get him working on it.
And I'm sure we'll post the book online, but just the textured cover and spine and the black printed pages, just looking at it, just like the You've Got Red on You book.
Yeah.
This is a nice like centerpiece. You could like set this on a table and people would pick it up and look at it and go, "Wow, that's a beautiful object." Or if I was maybe slightly interested in horror, but not a big horror person, if I were at Barnes and Noble or what have you, I was at the library and I saw it on the shelf, I would pick it up and take a look at it just because it's a very wonderful little object.
Yeah, well, God bless you for saying so. No, I couldn't be happier with the way the whole thing's turned out. And also, we have got. I mean, there are a lot of photos inside, and where possible, we tried. We reached out to um, uh, directors or anybody that might have sort of rare behind the scenes footage, not footage, stills or on set stills, or storyboards. There are quite a lot of storyboards in there. Greg Nicotero, who's one of the best known special makeup effects wizards. He has a career stretching back to Evil Dead 2. Probably best known these days for being one of the prime creative forces behind The Walking Dead. He's directed a lot of episodes and is an executive producer. He was good enough to send us a lot of behind the scenes images and drawings and concept art and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a real gold. You don't even have to read my words. You don't even have to read them. Just look at the cover, go through all the images, and I feel you're getting towards getting your money's worth.
Well, it being a little over 500 pages too. Yeah, there's plenty in there.
Yes, yeah, no shortage. There was a point. I mean, I did a lot of interviews for the book. I interviewed about 50 or 60 people, and I had the framework of the book anyway. And I'd interviewed, God, hundreds of people sort of during my time at Entertainment Weekly, and I'd also, in terms of research, gone through. I mean, the relevant issues of Fangoria. This is a book that goes from Screaming and Conjuring goes from Scream in 1996 to The Conjuring in 2013. So I went through 17 years of Fangoria, uh,
I bet that was
I,
just a great time too. And that's work.
that was a great summer. That was the summer of last year, and I happened to be in London, and we have the British Film Institute in London, which has a terrific library called the Rubin Library. But I didn't know if they would have Fangorias. I mean, for those who don't know, Fangoria is sort of the horror film Bible. It's a magazine. It's been around since the late 70s. But it's not even a film library. I wouldn't necessarily expect them to carry Fangorias. And what I was expecting to have a somewhat confusing conversation with the librarian. I wasn't even sure whether they would know what it was, let alone whether they'd have any. And I guess my hope was perhaps they'd have, a few copies on like an offsite facility somewhere, and they would tell me if I came back in a week, they would hopefully have dug them up. And I went into the library and I said, I'm writing a book and it's about horror films, and there's a horror film magazine called Fangoria. And I was going to go on and explain some more, and the librarian pointed behind her or in front of her and said, "Oh, they're all over there, bound." And there were just
Here's the
these two
Fangoria
rows.
section, just
Yeah,
the
yeah. There were these two shelves of bound. All I think every Fangoria. And so yeah, I spent the next sort of month or so ensconced in the Rubin Library at the BFI, just going through all those. Uh, all those copies of Fangoria. But then on top of the interviews I'd already done. and research like that, and um, going through commentaries on DVDs, because the era I was covering sort of saw the introduction and then the boom of the DVD. And if you look at like Eli Roth's DVDs, for example, the DVDs of the films that Eli Roth directed, like Cabin Fever or Hostel, some of them have got like 6 or 7 commentaries on them. So yeah,
Yeah,
I
that was
went
the
through all of
time where they
that.
would advertise the DVD with like 4 or 5 hours of behind the scenes material, and as
Yeah,
a movie fan during that time, I was eating all of that up.
yeah, yeah. Well, looking back on it now, it is sort of, because you do think. I mean, I think there is a strange sort of connection between those commentaries and podcasts. I mean, it's in many ways
Oh, very much so.
the same kind of vibe. You've got like 2 or 3 people in a room, talking about something. Um, but then I also, as I said, I interviewed about 60 people. And I would, interview someone like Greg Nicotero. I mean, that's the sort of extreme example in terms of contributions, because he's worked on so many horror movies. And so I spoke with him about 10 horror films. And then the next day would get up and type it all up, transcribe it, and then would put quotes into the draft that I had of the book, without really realizing that every time I did that, the book would grow by 2 or 3 or even 5,000 words. And so I woke up one day, and this was actually the one of the times when I was generally I, I I was just a bit unnerved, because I realized that my book was maybe 80,000 words longer than it possibly could be, frankly. I mean, as it is, it's 500 pages, it's 150,000 words, but the version I had was getting on to 250,000 words, which would make it, in the format we wanted to print it, like literally impossible to print. And so then I had to spend a week going through it and cutting about 75,000 words, which is the length of a fair-sized book. I mean, if you buy a
Wowee,
novel,
yeah.
that's probably around 75,000 words. But in the end, I got it down to the still outsized beast that it is.
So you mentioned it earlier. I do want to. There's a couple other things that I wanted to hit you with before we dig into the meat of it. But new book is Screaming and Conjuring: The Resurrection and Unstoppable Rise of the Modern Horror Movie. And as we're recording, getting ready for October of 2025, I figured it was the perfect time. Very smart on the publisher. Get it out right before spooky season starts. Hopefully, a lot of people will be in that mood and picking it up and talking about it. And I will confess, man, I got this book a few weeks ago and was going through it, and it's right there in the title. You talked about going through Fangoria from 1996 to 2013, from Scream to The Conjuring. The book is called Screaming and Conjuring. It took me an embarrassing amount of time to realize, oh, Screaming and Conjuring. That's those are the bookends of it. Like, I got
Right.
Scream, and then my mind, I was just like, oh yeah, Scream. Oh, Screaming and Conjuring. Like, that's like the title's just right there for them, and
Sure.
that took me longer than it should have to to pick up on. So great
But,
work on that.
but you know what? I'm the same sometimes with puns in titles, whether it's the title of a book or like the title of a company or something. That'll take me a second to be like, or I just don't even think about it really, and then somewhere down the line, you'll think, oh yeah, that's the pun going on there, or whatever it is. But yeah, it goes from, as I said, from the release of, I mean, I definitely sort of explain the history of horror, and then
Oh, it's
explain
a
how.
wonderful history. Yeah.
Thank you. And I sort of explained the reasons why by the mid 90s, a lot of people thought horror was on its last legs. But essentially, the story is from Scream in 1996 to The Conjuring in 2013. And then there's a lengthy epilogue, which kind of catches people up, almost to the present day. I certainly mentioned Sinners and 28 years later, and a number of other films that when I finished this book at the start of the year, I knew were coming out. The one exception I made to this time frame, really, though, was There's a film called You're Next, which is directed by Adam Wingard, who went on to make the two most recent Godzilla Kong movies. Um, and I that was a film that was whose release was delayed. It actually came out a month after The Conjuring, but its release had been delayed for 2 years, and it's just one of my favorite films. And it seemed unfair to leave it out, because it should have come out by rights a year earlier.
Yeah.
But that was the one sort of cheat I had, so I kind of shoehorned uh, 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 that into the main part of the book as well.
But I also love the epilogue as well because, I mean, yeah, you cover like the Ari Asters, Robert Eggers, Jordan Peele, Zach Kreger,
Yeah,
like modern horror fans today who like younger readers who maybe were not around or conscious or active movie watchers for particularly like maybe the first half of the material your book covers. Like the stuff bringing you up to the present day was great. And you talk about Barbarian, which is one of my favorite movies in the last several
yeah.
years, and you mention his Resident Evil, which hasn't even come out yet. So it's a very past, present, and future book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mentioned the upcoming Scream movie as well. Scream. Now I get confused. It's 4, 5, 6.
Seven.
Scream 7. Yes. Um, yeah, funny enough, I don't mention weapons because uh, I sort of when we were going through the final edits of the book in February, um, there was such little information about weapons. If
Which,
I
thank you
wasn't
for
even
protecting
sure.
that.
Well, I didn't even know. I mean, I suspected. I mean, I'm sure they had said it was a horror film, but I'm like, I don't even want to include it necessarily. I mean, partly because I did have. I mean, I cover the Resident Evil franchise a lot in the book, and it was great to uh, sort of be able to put a button on the end of that by talking about Zach Kreger's involvement in uh, sort of the upcoming revival of the franchise. But also, I just wasn't 100% sure that Weapons was even, a horror movie because we knew so little about it. So I thought I would just err on the side of caution and not mention that one.
Sidebar because it wasn't in the book, but did you get to see that like opening weekend with a big crowd?
Yes. I mean, now it's like
Oh,
the one
what an
thing that
experience.
no, it was absolutely amazing. And yeah, there are some movies that I will say to my girlfriend, "Look, I'm going to go and see this at 9 o'clock on a Thursday, and I would love you to come." But that's what I'm doing, because I feel like because I do listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of horror podcasts, and I just know that if there's like a horror film that I want to keep that I want to watch unspoiled, then I really do have to see it on the Thursday or the Friday it's going to open. Otherwise, somehow I'm gonna find stuff out about it. No, I thought that was I thought Weapons. I mean, I loved Barbarian too. Appropriately enough, I won't.
Man, oh man.
I saw it in like Manhattan's what I would have to call Manhattan's worst cinema, and it was in like the basement. So it was at least appropriate to the film, I guess. I saw that with my girlfriend, and whenever I mention it, she remembers she remembers the shitty cinema a lot more than the movie.
That's funny.
But I mean, I thought Barbarian was absolutely terrific. And then with Weapons, yeah, I mean, I thought it was great. I mean, I thought the first half was. I mean, I love not knowing what's happening in a horror film. I really value sort of surprise and intended confusion, I guess. And I loved the first half of Weapons, um, and jumped out of my seat a couple of times, I have to say. And then in
Oh yeah.
the second half, I also enjoyed, but the way the way the story is set up in the second half, you start to be told and to figure out quite, what is going on. And then to me, it doesn't make it less enjoyable because it turns into something else. But I thought the first half was kind of a wonder, and then the second half was a great time, as it were.
Yeah, no, both of those films, and I mean, right now for me, Zach Kreger is one of the most exciting filmmakers for that very reason, because he's talked at length in various outlets about his writing process. Like, he just writes. The whole, like, David Lynch thing where he's like, I don't really know where it's going, and we we very much don't either. Like, when he started Barbarian, he didn't know about Mother, and when he started Weapons, he didn't know about Aunt Gladys, and it just kind of came.
Yeah.
Like, in both of those films, and I mean, you more than me just because of your time on this earth thus far, but I've seen thousands of films. Both of those movies, at just about every turn, I'm like, I have no idea what's going to happen next. And like, at like 10 or 15-minute intervals several times, there's no way in the world I would have been able to predict where things went. And that's so refreshing as a viewer.
Well, it's interesting when you think about horror that I think sort of there are two things that people seem to enjoy in horror. I mean, there are lots of things, but there are these two sort of conflicting desires amongst horror fans, I think. The first of which is to see the same thing over and over again. Hence the
Yes,
popularity of
we
the
do
like
love
the
our
Friday the
sequels.
yes, and the popularity of the Friday the 13th franchise and well, so many franchises. Watch the same thing over and over again with alterations along the way. And the
Yeah, the new
second
4Ks of Nightmare on Elm Street just came out for like their 100th home video release.
Wow. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But then the other side, and I think which would appear to be in conflict to this, is the desire to see something you haven't seen before. A la Barbarian and Weapons and so many other films. And I
Sinners made a
yeah,
bajillion
yeah, yeah, yeah.
dollars.
And I have to say, I tend to lean towards enjoying uh, towards films where I don't know where I am or I don't know where I'm going, rather than kind of watching the same thing over and over again. But I think in all horror fans, there's a mix of those two. There's a mix of those two seemingly conflicting passions.
No, very much so. When I look at the slate of new movies supposed to come out next year, even though it's connected to the franchise, everything I've heard about Zach Kreger's Resident Evil, well, that it will be very much a Zach Kreger zombie movie that's called Resident Evil, that will have, I'm sure, maybe characters that are named after people in the games or what have you. But then I'm also like, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I'll be there for Saw 11 and for Evil Dead, whatever we're at now, 6 or 7. Like, I'm excited for those as well.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. I mean, the last Saw X was terrific, and I had a good time with uh, the last Evil Dead movie. Something
Very
actually that
much so. Saw
yeah,
X was especially because of the story it told. Thankfully, he's still alive and well and can still pull off that sort of movie. But yeah, as long as they're getting good, and that's the other great thing about horrors because of the budget. I also really loved how you covered the financial aspect of these. That was very interesting. That's something that I personally am very interested in, but that is also a direct corollary to, like, okay, you can chart, like, okay, what is making money? What's making $100 million domestically, or what are the top 10 or 20 movies a year? And you can see, oh, these kinds of horror movies in particular, because that's the focus of your book. What do we want as a culture horror wise, and what are we responding to? And I loved that aspect of the book as well.
well, it's interesting now because it seems like the only two quote unquote, I mean, nothing is a sure thing when it comes to box office, but the two sort of remaining sure things are big blockbusters that tap into sort of recent childhoods, I guess. So I'm thinking of movies like the live action Lilo and Stitch. I guess Minecraft to a degree. No, but those films
Sure.
that would interest today's kids, but are also of interest. Also have a nostalgia feeling, a nostalgic appeal for people who were kids like 15 years ago. I'm thinking also of the How to Train Your Dragon uh, remake, I guess. I haven't seen
Yeah.
any of these films, I should say. And so that's one thing that's still uh, seemingly a sure thing at the box office. And the other thing is horror. And strangely enough, this is the first time possibly ever that I've begun to fear for the future of horror because it is now so popular. And I don't mean sort of horror fatigue, but I now am concerned that somebody's going to finance like the next Sinners, or by which I mean, give somebody else 80 million or 100 million or however much that film cost
Whew,
to
that
make
yeah,
it.
it's dangerous.
And then that's going to fail. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to fail, but that could fail. uh, and then suddenly, people are like, oh well, this horror boom is over. Because I mean, this horror boom so far has been going on since Scream. It's been going on for like 30 years. I mean, one of the things that used to happen at it. I mean, I had a great time working at Entertainment Weekly, but one of the things that used to irritate me was you'd have a paranormal activity would come out and be a huge hit. And one of my editors would say, well, could you write an article about horror is back? And I'm like, horror hasn't been anywhere. What are you talking about? I appreciate like you haven't been paying attention to this, but actually, every year there are 3 or 4 substantial, horror hits. Yes, Paranormal Activity is different because it was so big and made for such a small amount. But it doesn't mean that horror hasn't been anywhere since Scream, really.
Yeah, no, your Blair Witches, your Paranormal Activities, your Saws, things like that, where the first one is made on a micro budget and then they become these billion-dollar franchises. Yeah, no, there's several social media accounts and I get in on it too whenever there's a big financial hit, which is regular with horror because they keep it's horror movies are like the only movies now that there are regular movies made for the 5 to $15 million market where they're small budgets but they're enough, and then it's easy to make that money back. So
Yeah,
yeah, I thought Sinners was incredible. I loved what they did. I'm so glad that so many different subsects of people went to go see it and made it financially successful. But yeah, we do $80 million horror movie scares me. We don't we don't really need that. It's not very helpful. And yeah, you just need one executive to go, well, we spent $100 million and this only made 70, and like we're
yeah,
done financing horror. And yeah,
yeah.
that would not be fun.
No, although you'll still have. I mean, it is interesting how, as you say, how many of these huge franchises were started by films which had a very, very small budget. I mean, half the
Plenty under $100,000.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, certainly Blair Witch,
It's like
certainly
20,000
Paranormal
bucks.
Activity. Yeah, Saw was $900,000, I think. Again, I mean, Insidious was like 4 million, and admittedly they gave all the actors kind of back end deals rather than paying them. But again and again, it's very huge returns for a very small budget. It's interesting though nowadays that uh, I mean, we talk about this being a fantastic year for horror, but I was listening to I mean, what some cultural critics do is suggest that really, like, some of these movies are not horror movies. These hugely successful movies. I was listening to a podcast this week. It was basically an awards podcast, and they were talking about whether to count certain films as horror films, and they mentioned Sinners and Companion, and I'm like, how are they not horror films? I mean, Sinners is a vampire movie where people get torn apart left, right, and center, and
Yeah.
Companion is about a killer cyborg. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could say that's horror science fiction, but I mean, really, I mean, it's just preposterous it's preposterous to me that assorted cultural critics, exclude what are obvious horror movies from being genre movies because it suits their desire to not credit the genre, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's that snobbery, but a lot of, I mean, you mentioned it a number of times. A lot of our big directors, like a lot of our favorite directors and like in the pantheon of cinema, not just cult favorite directors, got their start in kind of horror, grungy type stuff. Or if they didn't, they look up to them. And many of our favorite filmmakers have at least one movie that directly pay homage to that. Recently, we just covered Scorsese's New York, New York, and talked a little bit about Shutter Island. And he's like, I really wanted to make a Val Lewton movie, and it's like it took him a long time to do it. Like Francis Ford Coppola started with Dementia 13, but Scorsese, like he cashed in his chips to make a movie, a horror movie about a mental hospital. Like
Also,
it's in the DNA of cinema.
one of Scorsese's earlier shorts, The Big Shave, is about a guy shaving his
Sure.
face until it's, it's like something out of Hellraiser.
Yeah,
He
that
just
is
keeps
very
on
kind of
shaving
Sam
his face.
Raimi-esque.
Yeah, I know. I mean, so many of the biggest directors started in horror, and I mean, you mentioned Dementia 13, which was one of Coppola's early films. But I mean, what was interesting to me was how many uh, directors who started in horror were then uh, uh, co-opted by major studios to make superhero films, and this happened over and over again. And
Yeah.
the whole wave of superhero movies was in many cases powered by uh, people who'd started in horror. I mean, Sam Raimi is perhaps the most obvious example. Well, I'm not even sure he's the most obvious example, because you would say now James Gunn is perhaps the most obvious example. Um, James Gunn, Sam Raimi, Scott Derrickson,
Scott Derrickson, yeah.
directors and writers over and over again who are well, the funny thing is, they then, they moved into to superhero stuff. David F. Sandberg, who started his first feature was Lights Out, and then made an Annabelle movie, and then he made Shazam. James Wan, of course, who started off
Sure.
with Saw, and then went on to make the Aquaman movies. And what's interesting, I mean, the great thing for them, I think, is that so they start off on horror and then get to work in a much, with a much bigger budget, on films that are, even more successful than the successful horror movies. And then over the last few years, when making superhero movies has become much less of a sure thing, one by one, I don't want to say that they've slunk back to horror, but one by one, they've proudly, I guess, um, reconfirmed their status as horror filmmakers. I mean, Scott Derrickson's just bringing out, the Black Phone 2.
I'm
James
excited.
Wan, me too. James Wan went back to horror with Malignant, which is,
Yes,
I,
he did.
I mean, it sort of got lost. I mean, no fault of the film, it got lost over COVID. But I mean, good God, that's a crazy, crazy horror movie.
I would have loved
Yeah,
to have
and
seen that in a theater with a big crowd. I'm
yes,
sad that that was like a straight to HBO or whatever it was
yeah.
movie. What a wild movie.
That is a crazy movie. And David Sandberg came back to make the video game adaptation from earlier this year, and I can't remember the name of
The
the
Until Dawn?
Until Dawn. Yes,
I didn't see that
Until
one.
Dawn. I saw it. What I most remember about seeing that film was I was driving to a local multiplex, and a stone flew up off the road and cracked my windscreen as I was
Oh
driving
boy.
along. And that's never happened to me before. And what I should have done, and what listeners should do if this happens to them, is pull over to the side of the road and call their, you know, uh, you know, call their repair company or whatever. But I decided to plow on because I was only about 5 miles away from the cinema, but as I was driving, the crack in the windscreen started creeping down the windscreen. And I was
Oh boy.
genuinely
That's
concerned that the
ominous.
whole thing was going to explode. And I did think if I was going to see Final Destination, I probably would
Yeah.
have, have pulled over. But
uh,
Until Dawn, I carried on. No, so you have this. I mean, and again, I mean, I write about this in the book, but there is this sort of very now familiar arc of directors starting off in horror and then going off to superhero blockbusters, or in the case of James Wan, also one of the Furious Seven or Fast Seven. I get confused with the titles of that franchise.
yeah.
F7, and then one by one coming back to horror. And I'm sure these people will do other things as well. But yeah, it's interesting the how similar so many of those arcs. So I predict like James Gunn's going to be making Slither 2 in 10 years' time, basically.
I'd love that. I would love that. He seems to what an interesting career he has had, I guess. Another thing, I DM'd you directly as soon as I started the book a few weeks ago. I was delighted. So this is not a franchise that I grew up with or have a long relationship with, but very recently, some friends of mine who have a wonderful kind of horror exploitation podcast called Bat and Spider. It was either 200 or 250. They hit that episode milestone and they did the entire Phantasm franchise in one episode. So the whole community, we all watched all of them. And it was just such a fun experience. But I open up your book, your introduction, your first two words, Don Coscarelli. And I was like, oh, I know who that is now. I I've been an on and off horror guy, especially the last, I don't know, 5-10 years. I've been really into it. But that's not a name I would have known at the beginning of the year. So I was like, oh, what made you start with Don Coscarelli and Phantasm?
Well, it was mostly because he had what seemed to be the perfect story with which to start the book. Because the book starts in the mid '90s, and I'm explaining uh, what a poor state horror was in the early '90s. You had a lot of, I mean, there had been a lot of hugely successful flat. Good lord. There had been a lot of hugely successful slasher franchises in the '80s: Halloween, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Chucky. And there were lots and lots of less well-known movies uh, also being released. I think there's some preposterous statistic, like in 1982 there was like 87 slasher movies theatrically released
Wow.
in America. I am those. I mean, those numbers aren't right, but it's not an exaggeration. It's around there. And then in the early '90s, those franchises ran out of steam. Um, and you did have horror movies. I mean, Candyman, for instance, is an early '90s horror movie. That's
Hmm.
terrific. And then you had some big blockbuster horror movies. Interview with the Vampire with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. Dracula, talking about Francis Ford Coppola with Francis Ford
Incredible
Coppola's
movie.
Bram Stoker's Dracula with Gary
Yeah.
Oldman. But these were both not. I mean, they have terrifying moments, but uh,
Those were prestige dramas that
right.
the cultured adults felt good about going to see.
Yes, absolutely. And also their creators, I guess, were too snooty to make sequels, essentially. So there's no Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula Part Deux. So horror, so horror was in a sort of bad way, and I was trying to find a story that reflected this. And I interviewed Don Coscarelli for my book. I've spoken with and met Don on several occasions, and he really is a lovely man. Um,
That's exactly the word that I would like. He seems like just such a lovely guy who, over the course of like 40 plus years, just got to make movies with his friend.
yeah.
Like, how great is
Yes.
that?
Yes. His friend being Angus Scrim, who plays the tall man
Yeah.
in the Phantasm movies. But I have to say, Don has he's suffered more than most from the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Um, he's always struggling to get projects off the ground. He's always struggling to find budgets. He often sort of has to self-finance projects. If you want to find out really how horror films are made and how difficult it is, and also possibly be put off making horror films for life, then I would very much recommend Don's memoir True Indie, which came out a few years ago, which is a absolutely terrific read. But when I interviewed him, he told me the story about in the early '90s coming across a horror novel, a horror western novel by Joe Lansdale, the famous writer, who Don would actually go on to adapt a couple of uh, uh, Joe Lansdale stories, including Bubba Hotep, which is a Egyptian mummy
Love Bubba
movie
Hotep.
set in an
I
old
wouldn't mind a
penal colony.
sequel to that.
No, absolutely. But he came across this vampire western about essentially about. I'm sorry, it wasn't a vampire western. It was a zombie western, so it's set in the
Yeah,
old
mummy
west,
zombie.
and there are zombies. Yes, so and he wanted to adapt this book in the early 90s, and he sent off the proposal to all of these different film studios, and they all rejected him. And one of the sort of notes he got back was that the problem was that this was a zombie film, and no one wanted to see zombie films, and probably no one would ever want to see zombie films
Yeah,
because
didn't you
this
know
is
horror's dead?
right. Yeah, horror's dead. No one wants to see zombie films. And in fairness to the executive, the zombie genre had pretty much died in the mid '80s with Day of the Dead and Night of the and Return of the Living Dead, and people had just stopped making zombie films, and it was never, frankly, that popular a subgenre anyway. And so Don didn't get to make his film, and he told this story about how he went through the script that he'd written and crossed out every mention of zombie and replaced it with like monster and sent that out again, and nobody wanted to make that either, and so he moved on to other projects and returned to the Phantasm franchise. But that was like that just seemed to um be really illustrative of the state of horror at the time, that even someone as talented as Don, with the reputation of having created the Phantasm franchise, still couldn't get a budget to make a zombie western. I don't know what budget he was asking for, but my guess would be it wouldn't have been a huge amount of money. And so I put that at the front of the book, and I have to say, you were delighted that the first words you read in the book with Don Coscarelli. I sent Don a copy of the book, and he said he was quite shocked to see his name being the first two words in the book, but did have nice things to say
No, it
about
was
Screaming and Conjuring.
the Phantasm tapes and the covers are things that are definitely in my
Yeah,
mind from seeing them at the video store or at like comic book shops or whatever, like places that are horror adjacent. And I knew that there were like the little silver balls, and I knew the imagery of the tall man, but I didn't know anything about it. And then yeah, several months ago, I'm pretty sure that was earlier this year, me and a ton of my friends watched all five in pretty quick succession, and it was a wild journey, particularly those first three movies, I think are very good. And that first one was another one. It wasn't quite as low budget as Blair Witch or Paranormal Activity, but the insane multiplier of very, very meager budget to box office, particularly with that first one, I would think not that he would get a blank check, but that yeah, if he had a 5 million or under budget, give it to this guy. He's
yeah.
got like I don't remember what it was. I actually recently sent it to an indie filmmaker of mine who is beginning to dip his toe into horror because a lot of the people who he's working with are wanting to make horror. I was like, yeah, I watched these movies. They're really interesting, kind of the arc of them. But yeah, the first one was made for like, was it like $1 million and it made a
It was
hundred or
very
something
cheap.
like that?
Yeah,
Yeah. It's like
and he
if you
made
got a
that. He
guy
was
with,
very young when he made that. He was still in his possibly early 20s when he made the first Phantasm, and that was another
he was
reason
very
why.
young.
Yeah, that was another reason I wanted to start with Don, was because I think Phantasm came out in 1979, so it's technically a 70s movie. But he was younger than your Wes Cravens and your Toby Hoopers and so on. And he's more the same age as Sam Raimi, and so Don was someone who bridged the gap between uh, 70s horror filmmakers who were still active in the 2000s, still active during the era that I'm covering. But Don sort of bridges the gap between those guys and younger filmmakers like James Wan and Eli Roth and so forth.
So in your, because I mean the book really is, it's very interesting. You, like you said, you had a lot of really good interviews, behind the scenes stuff, a lot of good budget tracking, and it really is just a chronology. It's not like you don't have like your little soapboxes that you go off on, really.
No,
Like it's very much a straightforward history that's very rich and interesting. Definitely recommending it. I'm just looking at the time, man. It's very enjoyable talking horror with somebody. The time's going. I would say one of the things I wanted to ask you about while we still have you is like, what were some things you obviously lived through this period? You were going to the movies, you were getting paid by Entertainment Weekly to cover them. and you were just a fan, like, for preparing for this, the 96 to 2013, like, what were some things that kinda surprised you as you stepped back and kinda looked at it? Or what were some of the interviews that kinda shed new light on somebody who's been deep in it for so long? As you were making this book, what were some things that stood out to you kind of when you were actually doing the project itself?
I mean, one of the things that fascinated me was the companies that made it their business uh, to become horror companies, or to be horror companies, or to sort of accidentally stumble into being a horror company. I spent so many hours in the 2000s watching films which opened with the signage for Lionsgate,
Totally.
which is a film company, but over and over again it would be the Saw movies and the Hostel movies and My Bloody Valentine 3D and so on and so forth. And I think subconsciously at the time I would think, what is Lionsgate? Because I grew up, I could name you, in the 90s, Warner's, Paramount, Universal, Miramax, so on and so forth. And then suddenly I'm watching these films produced by a company that seemed to come out of nowhere. And one of the more enjoyable aspects of writing this book was kind of uncovering the stories behind some of these studios, but particularly Lionsgate. Lionsgate was set up in the late 90s as it's like a Canadian film studio. It kind of came out of nowhere. One guy called Frank Giustra, he was a money guy essentially. He was he worked in, I could never quite figure out what it was, but like mineral. He was like basically a Wall Street guy, but he was in Canada, uh, and he always loved movies. And he set up this film company, and it was supposed to be like a film studio, like an American film studio. And indeed, over time, it would increasingly, pretty swiftly, be based in Los Angeles. But the idea was that they would do all sorts of different types of movies, like any film studio. And the early movies included American Psycho, but
Mhm.
also Monsters Ball. They did some genre stuff, and I mean, they were the new kids in town, so they would pick up projects from here and there. And they had some successes, but never really big ones. And I remember I interviewed a lot of the people that worked there, and one of them said that, like, I said to him, is it true that such and such a film was make or break for the company, talking about a film that came out in like 2000 or whatever. And he said every film was make or break for the company. Like, for the first few years of Lionsgate, people half expected to come in on Monday and find empty offices and no phones, because the company had shut down. And then some guys joined the company from elsewhere, Jason Constantine and Peter Block, that were big horror guys. I mean, they did a variety of different stuff, but they knew um, they knew that you could always rely on horror to be a money earner, and started to look for horror. And what they found was Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses, which had been rejected for being, too controversial by other studios. They found Saw. They found Eli Roth's Cabin Fever. They found a film called Open Water, which was a thriller about sharks, which had the sort of
Terrifying.
gimmick, right? And it had the gimmick that had been shot with real sharks, like in the real sea. It was like the Blair Witch of shark movies. And uh, pretty much all of these films like exploded at the box office, and
Mega hits, all of
a
them,
lot of
yeah.
them had been bought. I mean, Saw was initially bought very much as a straight to DVD play, and they knew they could make this $1 million movie into, I guess they were thinking maybe they could make 5 million in DVD sales, but actually it went on to just earn a huge amount of money at the box office. And then they made Saw 2 um, uh, straight away, and they were off to the races with that. They didn't produce Hostel, but they distributed Hostel after Sony Screen Gems, which was a subsidiary of Sony that itself got into the horror pretty deeply with Resident Evil and Underworld, and they
Hmm.
had commissioned Hostel, and then they thought, oh, this is a bit much. We'll let Lionsgate distribute it, and so within a very short period of time, Lionsgate went from being a company that had whose success was kind of based on a wide variety of films to a company that became hugely successful because of horror films and because of Tyler Perry movies. Essentially, those were the two sort of very
Yeah.
unexpected generators of revenue for this company. Its stock went up and up and up and up through
Those are
the
two huge money makers.
2000s.
You could just
Yeah,
print money like horror and Tyler Perry movies.
yeah,
I It makes sense to me, but like reading it in your book, you're like, yeah, like 80+% of their slate was wildly profitable every year for a long time. And it's like,
yeah.
man, most like any company would kill for that. And especially Tyler Perry movies and horror movies, those are not big budgeted movies. It's
No,
not
no, they're
like you're
not.
risking a lot at that point.
No. And then, of course, Lionsgate buys Summit, which owns the Twilight franchise, and then they start producing the Hunger Games movies, and then John Wick, and they still release horror films, but they kind of ease out of that um, kind of extreme horror zone, which itself goes out of fashion towards the end of the 2000s. Hostel 2 doesn't do very well, and actually, well, I shouldn't say that because I interviewed Eli Roth, and he said Hostel 2 made a ton of money. I bought a house off the profits from Hostel 2. He's like, I wish every movie I made failed as bad as Hostel 2 because we made a ton of money off it. But it did not do the same business as Hostel, and so Lionsgate's Lionsgate's kind of game plan changed. But I was fascinated in dealing in diving into the history of Lionsgate, and I spoke to a few people from the company. And yeah, and it's kind of because you talk about movie studios and the suits and this and that. But especially with a rather scrappy company like Lionsgate, it's still one guy going to see a movie at the Toronto Film Festival, as Peter Block and Jason Constantine, Lionsgate executives, did with Cabin Fever, the Eli Roth's first movie, and then trying to persuade their fellow executives that this thing really should get released, or the same thing with Saw, and it's about getting their fellow executives' eyes on it, and then agreeing to stump up the money to put it into theaters.
That's funny. I was actually thinking about Cabin Fever earlier this year because we had a big horror festival, Panic Fest, that's here in Kansas City every year, and Serena Vincent was here with a new movie, so I got to hang out with her a little bit, and we talked Cabin Fever. That was not necessarily like a favorite of mine, but what it kind of ushered in, and I mean, as a Evil Dead homage, kind of keeping that alive or introducing a new generation of people to it. But yeah, that whole movement that came out of it, I very much like at that time, would not have called myself a big horror fan, but just going through your book, I was like, I saw many of these movies
Yeah,
as they came out. And I remember one of my closest friends at the time, a childhood friend of mine, he was a big horror guy. And I don't think I saw the first, like, I was plugged in and I knew that it was a phenomena, but I was maybe not like snooty about it, but I was like, that seems kind of gross when the first Saw came out. But then I got the DVD and I was like, oh wow, no, this is a great little thriller.
yeah,
And then I think from Saw 2 to was it like 6 or 7, whatever the final chapter was, they were a like they were an assembly line. Every year for many years it would come out in October and me and my friend would go. And I mean, it was a spectacle and that's what those movies were built on, but I'm pretty sure all of those movies made a lot of money, and then, like you said, at the time, the DVDs would go crazy. They would
yeah, yeah,
basically
yeah, yeah,
have 2 different, very profitable seasons. You make a ton of movie at the movies, foreign and domestic, and then you put the DVD out and maybe not double it, but but make a ton of money.
Well, and then you would have the unrated DVD. So you'd have
Exactly.
the theatrical, and then you'd have as you say, the sort of somewhat bare bones or bare bones for the time initial DVD release, which might only have 2 or 3 commentaries on it, and then you'd have the unrated DVD, not safe for cinemas release, which would
That was
have
the
a
time
couple
of
more
the
minutes of
unrated DVD. I remember
yeah,
that very well.
and people would be people just bought those in huge amounts, and
Well,
there
yeah, you
was a
had
real
libraries, blockbusters, collectors, but that's when like you would, yeah, whenever you were at Walmart or wherever getting your normal stuff, you'd be like, oh, let's grab the new whatever, like throw it in there. It's
yeah.
$15. But like everybody was buying it. Everybody had a DVD player at home before streaming. So DVDs were kind of how people saw movies. So you could spend 15 or $20 one time and then your whole family gets to see it. You couldn't take a whole family to the movies for $20. Like
Your,
it's
your whole
it was a
your
great
whole
deal.
family your whole family gets to gather around and watch Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses. Absolutely. Kids get granddad. We're starting House of a Thousand Corpses. Come in here.
What a
No,
wild
absolutely.
movie.
And that meant that people were obviously, happier to take risks with horror at the time, and yeah, the rise of the DVD was just extraordinary. And it's so weird that it came. It just seemed like the perfect format, and then obviously with streaming, disappeared. I mean, the other thing that I found fascinating was these franchises that out of nowhere become huge hits, and then the producers in the studio are like, "Great, we want another one, but we want it in 12 months' time." So
Yeah.
the announcement that there was going to be a Saw 2 came out like I think the Monday after Saw had arrived in cinemas. And I love writing about the original film, but I also love writing about the sequel because putting that together is a totally different kettle of fish. Because
I
you know,
loved Saw 2, by the way. That's maybe one
oh
of my
yeah,
favorites of the whole franchise. And kind of actually, when I heard people talking about how extreme it was, who probably were not horror people, Saw 2 is actually kind of what I thought the first Saw was going to be.
right,
But I vividly remember that teaser poster with the 2 severed fingers and like
yes.
the broken nail and all that. Like they had a really great marketing department for that whole initial run. And then they did like the jigsaws and the spirals and Saw 10 now or Saw X. But that Saw run was a very, I'm sure marketing students study that.
Well, as they should. The I spoke with Tim Palin, who's the head of marketing at Lionsgate during the time, and I mean, he was just a delightful. Again, I mean, horror people tend to be, with some exceptions, tend to be so nice. But Tim was in charge of marketing Saw and all of those things, and he just delighted in pushing the limits on posters and stuff. And he would make these. He would make these, as you say, like horrific posters with severed fingers and teeth, and would take them to
And they'd be
Comic Con.
and they'd be at the like that's back when I didn't have a great local theater then. You'd be at the AMC seeing like I don't know, maybe the animated Lilo and Stitch back in the day.
Sure.
And coming soon, Saw 3.
And and he'd take a lot of these photographs himself. I don't know about the specific with the fingers and the teeth and so forth, but he was a photographer, a very talented photographer as well, with a great eye, and so he would like print up, God knows, 10,000 or whatever posters of severed fingers, and they would be distributed at Comic Con, and then the MPAA would call him up or whatever and be like, "You can't give out posters of severed fingers." And I don't think Lionsgate would signatories to the MPAA, but they could cause problems for Lionsgate. So I can't. I apologize if I have some of the details wrong. What I do remember is that Tim Palin would always say, "Oh, what? Oh, no, 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 no. Those fingers. That's all like worldwide distribution. That's like the stuff we're sending to Europe. I guess like someone must have, accidentally." distributed them at Comic-Con or whatever, and would just basically, would just do anything to sort of get out of being in any trouble. But he loved pushing the envelope. And on the first Saw, one of the things for a lark that they did was to set up like a blood giving operation or campaign so that you got free
Oh, I like
Saw
that.
tickets if you gave like a pint of blood. And um just for a laugh, basically. But over time, like he said they had to keep on doing it. And it got like a bigger and bigger operation every year. It became a real pain in the ass for them to run this blood giving thing, which in the end proved extremely successful. And I think like the Red Cross or whatever sent him a cease and desist order at some point. I mean, I assume
That's
these
enough
were
blood.
yeah, blood was being taken by it wasn't the marketing guys, producing the needles and shoving them into people's arms. I assume they had like proper health professionals doing it. But yeah, that was one sort of. They were always thinking. Uh, they were always thinking out of the box, and they did this one thing again for Your Next, which is incredible, really. And I don't know how successful it was, but it is. Um, it's really imaginative. So in Your Next, long story short, it's a home invasion movie where a home is invaded by people wearing animal masks. And ahead of the film's release in 2013, what they did was they put up posters for other Lionsgate movies, including a Tyler Perry movie, on like bus stops. So they were bus stop posters, basically. But they were printed so that it looked like one of the guys in animal masks was standing behind you. So it was printed on. So you have a Tyler Perry poster, but you would have a reflection in the poster, or what looked like a reflection in the poster of one of the guys wearing animal masks. So if you were standing at a bus stop looking at a Tyler Perry poster, it would look like someone, like a killer, was standing right behind you, which I think is just incredibly imaginative, if also like quite terrifying
That's
for anybody
phenomenal.
standing at a bus stop. Yeah,
Well, and we're getting a little short on time, but and we didn't even really talk Scream a whole lot, but I want to catch up to The Conjuring actually. So I've kind of been on a horror reclamation just because it was not a thing that I sought out. Like I said, as I
sure.
gone through the book, I was like, I watched a lot of these actually, but I would not have considered myself a horror fan for maybe the first like 25 to 30 years of my life. But The Conjuring, that's not one I've dipped deep in. I know it's just had its fourth or fifth and ostensibly final movie, but it's got several movies under that umbrella. What made that so successful? I know that people like the ghost hunty stuff. James Wan's very talented. Like it's based on a true story, but those were and those were also studio movies. So that was like a different type of phenomenon.
Yeah. Yeah, James Wan always wanted to make a studio horror film, like a la The Exorcist or Poltergeist. So a movie that was, I think, by studio horror film, I think he means a horror film with a reasonable budget.
And
He had
polished,
made,
something
yeah,
that
yeah,
the
yeah,
masses would go see, not cut your leg off in a basement or else,
yeah,
like, not that
yeah.
sort of film.
And so Saw had been made for less than $1 million. He made a haunted ventriloquist dummy movie for Universal, which did have a called Dead Silence.
Yes.
What it's called? Yes, I get confused because he made Dead Silence, which is a possessed ventriloquist doll movie, and then he made Death Sentence, which is a thriller with Kevin Bacon around the same time. Um, but that was for Universal, but that was relatively cheap. And then he made Insidious, uh, which was also relatively cheap. Um, but then he signed up to make The Conjuring for New Line, which by that point was part of Warner Brothers, and that had a budget of around 30 million. So like a big budget for a horror film in 2013 or any time really. Um, yeah, why was it so successful? I mean, first off, James Wan knows how to scare the shit out of you. Knows how to make a good horror movie. and it was based on, it was inspired by the story of the history of Lorraine and Ed Warren, who were these paranormal, um, what's the word, paranormal investigators that lived in Connecticut. And ahead of the release of the first Conjuring, I actually visited Lorraine Warren at her house in Connecticut, and got face
Oh
to face with
wow.
the yeah, got face to face with the real Annabelle, which was kept in a glass case in, in the Warrens' occult museum. Ed Warren had passed away by that point. I mean, the genius really of supernatural horror, I think, and this, I mean, James Wan certainly did not invent this, but the genius is that you can kind of have endless amounts of antagonists. You can have endless amounts of ghosts. There's an endless supply of them. I mean, one of the things that tripped up the slasher movies of the 80s is that at the end of every movie, the hero or heroine had to defeat Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees, and then those characters had to be brought back at the start of the next
Exactly.
movie. Which,
They make 10 of them where they have to be
right,
defeated and then come back next summer
yeah,
for the next one.
or or with Saw, indeed, where they decided to kill off Jigsaw at the end of Saw 3. Spoiler for Saw 3. Because they assumed that really the road was running out of, you
How
know,
many of these are working? We surely aren't gonna make 10 of
yes,
these.
absolutely. And then they got into a lot of trouble with. I mean, that prompted a lot of difficulties going forward when you've killed off your main villain. But the thing about ghost stories, I mean, what's interesting is generally speaking, with horror movies, it is the monster that is the famous one, right? I mean, Halloween. I mean, I guess Halloween's not a great example because you think of Jamie Lee Curtis's character, but it's Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers. These are the iconic characters. Whereas the trick with The Conjuring, um, is that it's Ed and Lorraine Warren who are the main characters, and then you have assorted ghosts or demons or what have you, which made it. I mean, on the one hand, that's great because it sort of allows you. Um, well, and then they cast wisely. They got Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga to play the characters, and they're great.
Totally.
And they seem to have enjoyed the experience of playing those characters, and so I mean, I think there's a huge amount of technical expertise in those films, particularly the first two. And I'm also I'm a big fan of The Nun. I know Corin Hardy a bit, and I think The Nun is a hoot and a half. Although that doesn't feature the Warrens, but is still part of the Conjuring universe. And I think some combination of like a big budget, James Wan, and his fellow producer Peter Safran, who have overseen the whole franchise over the last 12 years. The great cast, and yes, the trick of sort of making the heroes the heroes, as it were, and uh, in a supernatural universe, you can essentially travel from house to house, dealing with different demons or ghosts as they turn up.
Well, and with those types of conflicts too, they're a lot lower on the blood and the viscera, so more people you can potentially pitch that to as, "Oh, this is like a real like the whole like this is
Yes,
a respectable movie that you can take your parents to or whatever."
yeah. Well, I don't know if you've seen the last Conjuring movie, but the
I haven't seen that.
Warrens, the Warrens by the end are very much treated almost like you know Mother Teresa and Bob Geldof or whatever. They're very much like they're very much like the superheroes of this tale, and not like Batman superheroes, but like Superman superheroes. They're regarded as absolute uh yeah, superheroes within the Conjuring universe. Now, I mean, I tend not to. I personally, I mean, I very much enjoy stories about ghosts, but I don't believe in ghosts. So I have some doubts as to whether about how we should look at the real life Warrens or real life paranormal investigators. But having said which, with all the terrible things going on in the world, that's not it's not something that keeps me up at night. I will say I don't believe in ghosts, but when I visited Lorraine Warren and went down to the Warrens Occult Museum beforehand,
Mm.
Tony Sperrer, who is or was well is Lorraine Warren's son-in-law and helped the Warrens with their investigations. He kind of gave me like he was like, "Don't poke fun at Annabelle." Like we had someone come here, didn't treat Annabelle with respect, died later on that day. And I have to say, I'm thinking, well, okay. I mean, even if that did happen, I'm not sure those two things are necessarily related. However, I'm someone who doesn't believe in ghosts, but I'm certainly not someone who's going to like give the
Not going
middle
to tempt
finger
fate.
no, I'm not going to be like sticking my tongue out to Annabelle for no good reason.
Yeah, I don't even know if I would go down and take a look myself, but
Well, I was
like,
being
I'm
paid to do
good.
so. I wasn't going to come
Oof.
back and say I was too terrified to. I mean, the weird thing about
Sure.
actually the weird thing about the occult museum is that in the films, it very much looks like a museum and everything is in a glass case and it's all neat and tidy. But Ed Warren collected both, you know, cursed artifacts, but he also had just an interest in collecting just like crap one might find at a garage sale, like you know, all sorts
A
of weird stuff. So
supernatural
you,
hoarder.
yeah, it was a bit like that. But you know, fair enough.
Well, Clark, thank you for your time, man. I'm enjoying and enjoyed this book very much. Do you have any, they can be from the book or modern, any kind of particular films, maybe a few this October that you recommend people check out if they haven't or revisit?
Well, I have to say, I always feel I should um, recommend Shaun of the Dead. My first book was about Shaun of the Dead, it suits me to do so. But also, I watched that film, as you might expect, a lot while writing the book, and I did assume at some point, even though I started off loving the film, I did assume there would come a point where I'd become sick of Shaun of the Dead, but that never happened. And in fact, last year they re-released it, and I went to see a screening of the new 4K version in London, and had as good a time as I have with watching it on any other occasion. So I think that's a good recommendation. I think certainly from the era that I write about in the book, I think Neil Marshall's *The Descent*
Yes.
is a enduringly terrifying film. For those who don't know, it is about a group of women cavers who go caving in the Appalachian Mountains and encounter subterranean monsters. And I'm certain I'm about the millionth person to say this, but you've got a solid hour before the monsters turn up, or 45 minutes before the monsters turn up, and it's one of those films where you realize you would watch an entire where it would be an enjoyable film even if the monsters didn't turn up. But then they do, and it becomes just very, very frightening. But it's very, very frightening already. I mean, I don't like. I mean, I'm not claustrophobic, but I don't like small spaces, and there are certainly bits in that movie where people seem to be um, just trapped in tiny, tiny tunnels, and it's generally terrifying. So yeah, I think also being a Brit, I'm always supportive of horror made by British folks. So I think Shaun of the Dead and The Descent would make for a pretty good double bill. Probably play The Descent first, and then you can have a good time with Shaun of the Dead afterwards.
Yeah, those Edgar Wright films never do get old, and The Descent is phenomenal. It's been too long since I've seen it, but that was one again I saw right when it came out, and I was like, "This is terrifying and wonderful." The recently, I bang the drum a lot, but if it's spooky season and you haven't yet, Barbarian and Weapons. Now Weapons is
Yeah.
out to own on home video and VOD and all that. And then I'll say the book reminded me probably maybe I saw how the original Halloween first. And I guess technically Jaws turned into a franchise, but I kind of think of that as just a movie. But the first horror franchise that I really watched when I was young that scared me that now I think is just so much fun and maybe the most consistent franchise is the Chucky movies that you can kind of watch with a variety of people. Like there's some blood, like it is scary, but they go from supernatural horror to slasher to high camp to trauma back to kind of silly fun and kind of being helmed by the same creative team. So
Yeah.
I went through that whole series, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago again, and I was just really impressed with how consistent those were.
Yeah, Don Mancini
Yeah.
has either written or co-written or written and directed all of them. And yes, you can definitely tell that there is one mad genius behind all of it. I will say I would agree 100%, except I think some of it is pretty bloody. I mean, I think because it's about a
No,
doll,
as it
you're
goes, the
you're
particularly the most recent two, The Cult and Curse, were both pretty bloody. But
yeah,
man, the back-to-back of Bride of Chucky and Seed of Chucky
yeah.
was just so much fun.
I think it's interesting sometimes when you have movies that are a lot of fun and are very poppy, that it's easy to forget how much
Oh, wait. Yeah,
gore
yeah,
and
yeah,
mayhem
no.
they have.
That
I
is
was just
true.
thinking
The
about
motel.
another film I would recommend, especially around Halloween, is Trick or Treat.
Yes.
And I was rewatching that the other day, and that is not a film that I necessarily think of as being all that gory. And uh, I mean, compared to some films, it isn't. But there is a lot of guts and gore in that film, and
Okay.
it's just because it's because it's presented
It's
in
fun.
yeah, in like a fun, poppy, humorous fashion. You could say the same about Shaun of the Dead as well. You forget. I think subconsciously you sort of forget quite how much mayhem is going on.
Where can people find your book? Is there a particular place where it's more helpful for you, the author, or get it wherever you can?
Yeah, you can go to 1984 publishing.com and order it from there. Both Screaming Conjuring and my Shaun of the Dead book is available from there. I'd like to say it's available at all good bookstores. In fact, it's available in some good bookstores. But um, if you can find it online. It's one way and another. So it's not by any means hard to find.
Tell your local
I won't have
bookseller to
that as a
stock it for
guess.
the season.
Yes, go in and say, well, "Have you got the latest Clark Collis?" So and wait for the blank expression on their face.
Yeah, no, both
But
books are great for the season.
yes, no, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, Clark, it was a wonderful time reading this book. Thank you for your time. It was great talking with you. You're welcome back anytime to talk movies.
Well, I think I better get cracking writing another book, and then I can come back and have something else to talk about.
Do we have an idea of the next one yet?
I've got some ideas, but I had some ideas after the last book, and they didn't necessarily come to fruition. But yeah, I'm researching something. I but I don't really want to. It's not that I can't talk about it, but I don't want to. I'm just oddly superstitious about talking about things until
No,
they're
we'll
firmly
save
pinned
that
down.
then.
Okay.
Well, Screaming and Conjuring out at some fine bookstores. If your fine bookstore doesn't have it, tell them to order it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Clark.
That's great. Thank you so much.
All right, there was my conversation with Clark. Really fun convo. I genuinely enjoyed the book very much. Looking forward to continuing to read it throughout spooky season and just having it as a reference point. Like you said, a lot of great interviews, a lot of great behind the scenes materials. If you are a horror fan or have a horror fan in your life, this book is absolutely worth getting and adding to your bookshelf. If you love the show, the best way to help us out is to listen and share it with your friends. You got a friend that likes horror movies, you got a friend who used to subscribe to Entertainment Weekly, you got a friend who would love to hear a funny Tim and Eric story, share the episode with them or put it on whatever social media you're still on. And if you're not, throw it in your newsletter. If you throw it, we actually had one or two people, I've been told, share specific episodes of The Substance in various newsletters. If you ever do that, email me, DM me, and I will try to share that. We're always just trying to, the whole point of the show is to have good conversations with people and share great resources. So if anybody does that, would love to share that. And if you want to go above and beyond and want to just throw a little bit in the tip jar because you appreciate what we're doing, you appreciate independent creators out there and want to toss us a couple bucks, you can do that on Cash App, $ the Substance Pod. And we greatly appreciate everybody who does that as we are gearing up for the new year. Got a lot on the board that we're trying to do. So if you want to be a part of that, that's always appreciated. Okay, next week we are, if everything goes according to plan, we're going to have a fun spooky season, substantive cinema. So more will be announced probably on Instagram as that gets firmed up. So until then, I've been your host, Philip Marinello, saying thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time on The Substance.